Now that we've created our tower pad and our tower yard profiles and we have 3D features, we can create a terrain model now. And the terrain model can be used to see contours and calculate volumes, apply material depth, and we can also use it to show profiles and cut cross sections and things of that nature. So we want to create a terrain model of our site here, just of the tower pad and the tower yard. So to do that, we need to go to the terrain tool. So we want to go up to the terrain tab, go to create from elements, and over here you'll see the create terrain dialog pop up, and we want to select a feature definition of proposed drainage contours. We want to display the contours when the terrain's created, so we're going to select proposed drainage contours. And we want to key in a name of tower yard since we're creating a terrain of the entire tower yard here. So we're going to key that in. And on your cursor, you're going to notice the heads-up prompt's going to be looking for you to locate the element to add to the terrain. So we're going to select the tower yard, and I want to point out something here before I do this, because I can do this in 2D or 3D. Because I have a vertical or profile assigned to my horizontal in 2D, I can actually select it in 2D, or I could come over here in 3D and select it. I'm just going to select it in 2D for now, doesn't really matter, and I'm going to right click to accept. And then for the feature type, I'm going to set for the boundary, since this is the boundary of our terrain. I'm going to left click to accept. The edge method will set for none, left click to accept. And you'll see the terrain models created over here in the 3D model. Now the next thing we want to do is add our tower pad feature to the terrain model. So to do that, we're going to go up again to the terrain modeling tools, go under feature management, say add features, and this time we're going to add the tower pad as a break line to the terrain model. So once again, I'm going to locate my terrain model, which I can select in my 2D view here. Okay, so you select that, and then for the tower pad, we can select it from the 2D view or the 3D view, doesn't really matter. I'm just going to select it from the 2D view here. Left click, and then right click to accept, and then the feature type, we want to use break line, so we're going to add it as a break line to the terrain model. Left click to accept, and then you'll see the terrain model update. And it's displaying the contours or the drainage contours on here because of the feature definition that I specified when we created the tower yard terrain model. So once again, just want to point something out, that rules and relationships do exist between this terrain model and the base elements that we use to create it. So if that civil geometry were to change for any reason, that terrain model will update. So you do need to be aware of that. This is a rules-based terrain model that we just created. And to give you a quick example of the rules and relationships that exist between the civil geometry and the terrain model, I'm just going to come over here and make a quick change to my profile that was created. So I come over here and I select this. I go into my properties. You can see we used a 1% slope projection from our tower pad. So I'm going to change this to maybe like 5% just to give it a drastic change so we can see the terrain model update. And notice how the profile updates as well as the terrain model. So again, just remember there are rules and relationships that exist between the civil elements and the terrain, and the terrain model itself is dynamic and will update accordingly. So let's just change this back to -1 and we'll continue on. Another thing too is we use the feature definition called proposed drainage contours, and that displayed our proposed drainage contours in our terrain model here. We do have the ability to adjust that on the fly at any time. So if we want to change this to triangles, we can do that. Go over to our element selector here, select the terrain model, hover your cursor over it until the context menu appears, and then if you click on the properties, you'll see the name of the terrain model, the feature definition that we chose, which was proposed drainage contours. If we choose a different feature definition, that will change the display of the terrain. So if you choose proposed triangles, it'll display the triangles. If we just want to see the boundary, we can change it to proposed boundary. As you can see, we have a lot of options for how you view the terrain model. So we have these preset settings here under the feature definitions. So I'm going to set this back to drainage contours, but then you can also manually override those as well down here. So if you didn't want to see the contours, you could turn them off here as well. But generally, you're going to use the feature definition to display what you want to see on the screen. So just want to point that out about the terrain properties there. One other thing I'd like to point out is sometimes it's necessary to adjust the terrain model stroking definition values to increase or decrease the accuracy of the terrain model along the linear elements and curves and profiles. The stroking definitions affect the accuracy of the triangles that are created in the terrain model. So if you need to review the stroking definition values, all you have to do is select one of the geometric elements. For instance, if I select my tower yard element here and I go up to my properties, and you go into the properties, you'll see that there's a stroking definition tab here, and you can see the stroking definition values, and that's going to determine the accuracy of the triangles. So if you need to adjust those, these are set by default with some configuration variables in your workspace. So if you need to override those configuration variables, then you could just key in the new stroking definition values here. So let's close the properties and continue on. I want to take a look at how we can analyze the slope of our terrain model. If you recall previously, when we created this tower yard element, we created it by projecting a 1% cross slope away from our tower pad. So I want to check my terrain model to make sure that I have a 1% slope away from my tower pad. So to do that, we can go up to our terrain modeling tools here. And if we go under analysis, you'll see we have a tool here called Analyze Between Points. So what this allows us to do is pick 2 points, and it'll give us the slope and the elevation between those 2 points, as well as the elevation difference. So I'm going to select this Analyze Between 2 Points. It's going to prompt us to select our terrain model. So I'm going to come over here in the 3D view, select the terrain model. And then in its 2D view, I could come over here and I can pick a point. So I'm going to pick a starting point. So we want to slope away 1% from our tower pad to our tower yard. So you can see the dynamic text that shows up on the screen here shows us that we have the 1% slope. Also indicates the elevation difference, as well as elevation 1 and 2 of the 2 points that you pick on the screen. So I'm just going to pick another point here. And you can see it's indeed 1% away from the tower pad. It's just a handy tool for checking your slopes and some of your elevations in your terrain model.